Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Surely one of the most beautiful seaside cities in the world, and surely one of the most dramatic places to run a Grand Prix. Down there near the waterfront, just out of the centre of Rio de Janeiro, the new Jacarepagua circuit, there it is, surrounded by hills, very, very hot indeed, and indeed very bumpy. You can see the lines down the road from where resurfacing has taken place, but nevertheless a circuit that's going to give these 26 drivers a very hot and very bumpy race. There is the hero, Nelson Piquet, but despite the start-finish line that the Brabham is sitting astride, he is back on the fourth row, the Brazilian hero, the reigning world champion with the Brabham. That's Michele Alboreto in the Tyrrell back on the seventh row, and you can see the heat shimmering off the road already. Niki Lauda has a collar around his neck, an inflated collar which is going to support the neck muscles, and this is a problem at this circuit because a lot of the corners are left-handers. The muscles of the drivers used to coping with right-hand corners particularly, but on this anti-clockwise circuit that's going to be another problem. Ricardo Patrese there. This is Gilles Villeneuve, very, very impressive in practice. He's on the front row with the latest turbo Ferrari. Villeneuve, always a trier, always a charger, and determined to make a strong start from his front row grid position alongside Alain Prost. Alain Prost, the winner of the only Grand Prix we've had so far this year, the Kyle Army race. There is Bernie Eccleston, the boss not only of the Brabham team but the most important man in the Formula One Constructors Association. And as the grid is cleared, hordes of people all around, and let's have a look at the grid. On pole position, Alain Prost with the Turbo Renault, the current World Championship leader, and of course the winner at Kyle Army. Kyle Army, 6,000 feet above sea level. That will have helped the turbocharged cars. Here we're right down on sea level, but nevertheless the Turbo Renault comfortably quicker. 1 minute now to go. The Turbo Renault comfortably quicker than anybody else in practice. Alongside him another turbo car, that is Gilles Villeneuve in the latest turbo Ferrari. Behind them, the fastest non-turbocharged car, Keke Rosberg of Finland. There you see Winkelhock in the yellow ATS number 9. Manfred Winkelhock about to have his second ever Grand Prix. The 1 minute board still up. The second row then, Keke Rosberg of Finland, with alongside him René Arnu in the other Renault. Row 3 is Niki Lauda, complete with that inflatable collar that you saw to help his neck, and Carlos Reutemann in the other Williams, the man who so nearly won the World Championship last year. Row 4, the man that crowd, 80,000 people of them have come to see, Nelson Piquet, and alongside him Didier Pironi in the other Ferrari. The lights are red, that means the green light is coming for the start. The lights are green, the field is away, plumes of rubber smoke, and look at Keke Rosberg looking for the gap in between the front two, but it's Villeneuve who makes the start. The red Ferrari storming ahead from the two yellow Renaults. So Villeneuve from the outside of the front row is the leader. Villeneuve in the Ferrari. It's Arnu and Keke Rosberg side by side for second place. Rosberg has the inside line. Rosberg is second. Arnu third. Prost fourth. And it's Didier Pironi fifth, coming up in the second of the turbo Ferraris. Villeneuve then the leader. This is lap 1, a twitch from the three leaders as they bounce across the curbs, and Rosberg is challenging for the lead already. Rosberg looks at the outside. This is a long left-hander, and Rosberg is alongside, but Villeneuve has the line. Now Rosberg, can he run out of road? He just clips the curb coming out, and that allows Arnu to get alongside. Arnu is going alongside and into second place. Villeneuve the leader, Arnu is second, Prost comes through now into third place. The power of these turbo Renaults telling on the long straight. So Ferrari Villeneuve leads, Renault second and third with Arnu and Prost, and Rosberg down to fourth place. Turbo cars 1, 2, 3, Rosberg fourth in the Williams. This is the first of 63 laps. There you see the sea in the background. But no, none of these drivers have time to look at the scenery. They're all concentrating on a long, hot race ahead of them. Villeneuve going as hard as possible right from the start. Arnu staying with him in the Turbo Renault. Through the long left-hander, the long right-hander I should say, and back onto the circuit. You see the marks left there by the spinning wheels, the rubber on the road. That was the start just one lap ago, but this is now lap 2, and Arnu is challenging hard. Alain Prost, the pole man, hanging back a little bit, running the defensive role in third place to keep the attentions of Rosberg behind him and allow Arnu, his teammate Arnu, to set about chasing the red Ferrari. On the second lap then. And you see a white car closing on the fourth man, Rosberg. That is one of the Brabhams. It's not Piquet, it's actually Patrese, who's come up astonishingly well from the fifth row. There is Patrese just in your picture briefly there. And what of Nelson Piquet? Piquet also moving up. Piquet and Pironi battling at the head of the second queue that you see. The second red car is Pironi, and it's Piquet who is challenging hard Pironi. This is the red car at the head of the front queue. That is the Canadian Gilles Villeneuve, who leads the Brazilian Grand Prix. Arnu dogging in his wheel tracks. Very, very powerful car indeed, this Ferrari. 2 wins for Villeneuve last year with a very much less effective chassis. But now that Dr. Harvey Postlethwaite has gone to Italy to join the Ferrari team, he has designed this chassis. And although it's still a heavy one, it's clearly working a lot better than the Ferrari chassis was last year. So now they have a chassis to match their power, and Gilles Villeneuve has a car that can really match his talent. And still Pironi leads the second queue, with behind him, that was Piquet and Carlos Reutemann behind him in the second battle, but this is Villeneuve now. Arnu, Prost and Rosberg holding the first 4 places. And on the long straight and into the left-hand curve, the Ferrari not getting away, but keeping the gap constant back to Arnu. You can see Arnu with his white crash helmet tucked down in the cockpit, and Prost getting a little bit closer under braking for the long left-hander, and now Arnu challenges. Arnu trying to nose on the inside, but Villeneuve very used to this sort of defensive driving. Remember that wonderful victory in Spain last year when he had a 5-car queue behind him almost to the very end of the race, and he never made a single mistake. And this is Patrese moving past. That was Patrese challenging the Williams of Rosberg. Patrese driving a wonderful race, of course a newcomer to the Brabham team, but nevertheless a very, very experienced Italian. And Patrese, with the Arrows team for so long, now the number 2 to world champion Nelson Piquet in the Brabham. There they are, and that is the white car, the first white car you see with the blue stripe down its nose. That is Riccardo Patrese, and meanwhile his team leader Nelson Piquet on his home circuit is now leading the next queue. In fact, we now hear we have lost. There is Piquet coming through. That is Piquet passing the Finn Keke Rosberg. So Piquet moving past Rosberg to join his teammate. I was just about to tell you that we hear that Didier Pironi has gone off. He's back in the race, a big spin for the second of the 2 Ferraris, and Pironi is back on the track, but way, way down the field in 16th place. There you see it again, a perfect manoeuvre for Piquet coming up the inside, carrying the World Championship number 1, and Rosberg therefore demoted to 5th place. So, Turbo Ferrari, 2 Turbo Renaults, 2 Cosworth Brabhams and 1 Cosworth Williams. That is the 5-car battle. Reutemann the next up, but a long way down, and once again Villeneuve has the attentions of René Arnoux in his mirrors. A very much neater, tidier looking car, this new Ferrari, than last year's car. Much closer to the current thinking of Formula One cars. And Harvey Postlethwaite, of course, responsible for Hesketh designs and for Wolff and Fittipaldi designs in the past. Very experienced Formula One designer. And his arrival at Ferrari has done them a lot of good, but Renault seem to be very effective here too. And remember, we're on sea level, but the turbo cars absolutely dominating this race so far. The first 3, but as I speak, Prost has yielded 2 places to the 2 Brabhams. Arnu still second. The 2 Brabhams of Patrese and Piquet have now both gone past Alain Prost. So Prost, the man who dominated Kyalami, the man who dominated practice here, not going so well at the moment. Still the leader, Gilles Villeneuve of Canada in the Turbo Ferrari. Still in second place, René Arnoux. We now have Brabhams of Patrese, there he is, and Piquet, there he is, ahead of Alain Prost, and then the two Williams cars of Keke Rosberg, the newcomer to that team, and Carlos Reutemann, the old hand. Very, very hot indeed here, and also very humid, very sticky weather indeed. Not the nicest conditions to be sitting in a hot metal tube swathed in flameproof overalls, because if it's 95 degrees Fahrenheit outside, which is what it is, inside the cockpit of these cars, with the hot water tubes running from the radiators back to the engine, with the fuel around you in the pods, with all your flameproof gear, with the weight of your crash helmet, very, very warm indeed. And now is Patrese going to be able to challenge Arnu? Villeneuve seems to be getting away a little bit in the Ferrari. And indeed, Patrese is very close to Arnu. The two Brabhams dogging the Renault. And you see there that Prost has slipped back quite a way. The two Williamses behind Prost. Down the long straight. Can the Brabhams get close enough to the Renault slipstream? Not this time. The Renault, of course, enormously quick in a straight line. Very, very powerful engine indeed. These turbocharged Renaults getting on for 600 horsepower these days. But now, as they go through the left-hand curve, Patrese gets very, very close indeed. And his teammate Piquet hanging back a little bit to watch developments and let his teammate Patrese, the number 2, there he is, let Patrese get upset about his attack on the Renault faster in a straight line than the Brabham, and so it's on the corners and it's under braking that Patrese must pick off Arnu if he can. And he's very anxious to do that, because what is now happening, as you see, is that the Ferrari is starting to creep away. The Ferrari is starting to build up a cushion. Gilles Villeneuve there in the Ferrari number 27. This year, Villeneuve carrying the number which Alan Jones carried 2 years ago towards the World Championship, and perhaps that's an omen for the Canadian, one of the bravest, one of the hardest drivers in the Formula One circus. Villeneuve, a man who never gives up unless all the wheels have come off his car. And that's Piquet moving up. Piquet darts out of the slipstream, and it's Piquet who takes up the Brabham challenge. And Patrese, seeing him come through, didn't exactly shut the door on his teammate quite sensibly. Piquet has had his go at Arnu, it hasn't worked, so now Piquet is coming through. He's in the slipstream, he pulls out of the slipstream, he uses the still air behind his teammate to get close to him, pulls out under braking, and now therefore on his home ground, and that must have pleased the 80,000 Brazilians watching the race. Nelson Piquet has now moved ahead, and now let's see if Piquet is going to get close in Brabham number 1 to Arnu. He certainly seems to be doing just that. Piquet looking for every inch to close on Arnu. Villeneuve still the leader. Arnu still second. Piquet the new third man. Patrese is fourth. And the Williams is still 5th and 6th for Keke Rosberg and Carlos Reutemann. And you could see the cars bumping and porpoising over the bumps. One of the problems that several of the drivers have been having here in practice, Nigel Mansell was mentioning this. There you see the order down to Rosberg. Prost, of course, is still there in 5th place. And then the two Williams is 6th and 7th. The trouble that they've been having, this porpoising trouble, which is where the car moves in a diagonal movement at very high speeds over the bumps and makes it very, very difficult to control when you start to try to slow the car for the corner that comes. The car moving around because very little suspension movement on these modern Formula One cars to take best advantage of the rules as they're currently written. The cars are almost rigid on the road. Villeneuve. Arnu, Piquet, closing up under braking once more. Piquet just looking for a gap, and that there is Andrea de Cesaris. De Cesaris in the first of the two Alfa Romeos, and he's having a tyre change very early on, so problems for de Cesaris. And now the two Brabhams once again dogging the Renault. Once again, Piquet. And that's Elio De Angelis. De Angelis has gone straight off the circuit there. We gather, we're told that Alboreto was involved in that incident. Alboreto in the Tyrrell number 3 also involved. They must have touched. Both of them back in the race now, but that has certainly delayed them. Meanwhile, there is the battle for second place once more. And still, Piquet waiting for a little mistake, feinting first one side then the other. And all the time, this is what Villeneuve needs, a battle for second place, which allows him a clear run to move ahead. And there you see Rosberg moving up now. Rosberg is now past Prost, and Piquet once again having a look at the inside on the long left-hander. But Rosberg it is who has now moved up into 4th place. Into 5th place, I should say. Rosberg now 5th. Prost dropping back, ever dropping back. The Renault challenge being led by second man Arnu. There is Villeneuve first in the red Ferrari. There is Arnu second in the yellow Renault. And then the 3 white cars, the 2 blue and white ones, the Brabhams of Piquet and Patrese, and the green and white one is Keke Rosberg, making such a name for himself as the new number 2 in the Williams team, following the retirement of Alan Jones at the end of last season. That is Derek Daly from Ireland, and he has gone off. And we've also got De Cesaris back in the pits once more, looking at the underneath of the car as well as changing the tyres. So something wrong underneath the Alfa Romeo of Andrea De Cesaris, who drove for McLaren with John Watson last year and got a considerable reputation for having accidents. No accident up here yet, it's just close racing, wheel-to-wheel stuff, as yet again the Ferrari eases away as that now becomes a 4-car battle for second place. You see Prost behind. Prost has Reutemann on his track, so Prost falling back. Here is Arnu and the 2 Ferraris, and Keke Rosberg up with that battle now. 4 cars arguing over second place. And provided Arnu doesn't make a mistake, it seems that there's very little that Piquet can do. He's tried almost everything, and Arnu just has the power to pull out of trouble on the long straights and can keep the door shut on the corners. You saw the front of Piquet's car moving there. Piquet trying now on the inside. And once again, Arnu slams the door in the Brabham's face. There's the Ferrari pulling ever ahead. Ferrari, Villeneuve leads. Arnu battling over second place. And Rosberg's coming up. That is Rosberg attacking Riccardo Patrese. So Rosberg, having fallen to the very back of that battle, having been challenging for the lead on the first lap, Rosberg now coming back through, and Rosberg has split the 2 Brabhams. Arnu second, Piquet third, Rosberg, Keke Rosberg of Finland, the new 4th man. A wonderful battle, and this is what classic Grand Prix racing is all about. Now Piquet, what can you do? You no longer have your own teammate behind you to defend, so as well as looking for a place away past Arnu, you've got to keep the door shut yourself on the attentions of Keke Rosberg, and they are very close attentions. Rosberg now looking to find a way past the man who's trying to find a way past Arnu, and the 4 of them bunched very, very close together. Behind you see Prost, and Piquet does it! A perfect manoeuvre right under the rear wing of the Renault to get the maximum suck of the slipstream. Pull to the inside, leave your braking as late as you possibly can. There is Sylvia, Nelson Piquet's girlfriend, and she's seen that her man has moved up. Now we see it again. So close you can barely see it until he pulls out, and there's nothing then that Arnu can do about it. So, Nelson Piquet of Brazil, having come up from the 4th row of the grid, 7th place on the grid, Piquet now up to second. There you see the order: Villeneuve, Piquet, Rosberg, Arnu, Patrese and Prost. Patrese there falling back a little bit on that caption anyway. There is the new 3rd man. And now we're going to see whether the Ferrari is able to stay in front. That's Eddie Cheever, who's been having a miserable weekend in the Talbot Ligier. The car steaming as he stops, and he seems to be limping there. perhaps a burst radiator, because lots of steam coming off the back of the car, and perhaps there's some hot water to add to the heat in the cockpit. Anyway, Chiva clearly out. Now, whereas the Ferrari was able to pull comfortably away from the Renault, and Villeneuve was enjoying a fairly comfortable lead, we now have a 3-car battle for the lead. And it's Rosberg who's pushing hardest. Villeneuve in the leading car, the Ferrari. Nelson Piquet in the middle of that trio. And the third man, Rosberg. Rosberg very close up to the Brabham there, but it didn't do him much good, and he slipped back. Now they're lapping one of the ATSs there. And the ATS keeping well over to the left of the road as the three of them go through. Ferrari, Brabham and Williams. Very twisting, heavy circuit, heavy on brakes, heavy on tyres, heavy on drivers, and bumpy too. And you can see the heat shimmering off the backs of these cars. Hit the brakes, the car chirping under braking. Nelson Piquet perhaps a little bit steadier in the Brabham there than the Ferrari. The Ferrari starting to look a little more untidy as they come up to lap. That was Jacques Laffitte's Ligier, I think, that they're coming up to lap there. It's not actually, that's Chico Serra, another Brazilian. That was Chico Serra in the Fittipaldi, and they all move past him on the long straight. As Chico Serra keeps well over to the right of the road, all three of them passed on the long straight, so that particular backmarker being lapped won't have made any difference to the order. This can often make a big difference to a battle for the lead if there are backmarkers to be overtaken and you get a slower car splitting the leaders. But for the time being anyway, Villeneuve's Ferrari, Piquet's Brabham and Rosberg's Williams still tied together as if by string in this lead battle. Pounding down the long straight. You can see the bumps, you can see where they've resurfaced the circuit there. There's another bump, all doing its work to pound the drivers. And now Villeneuve pulls away a little bit briefly, only for under braking the two Cosworth-powered cars to close up. The turbocharged Ferrari very much more powerful, but in a heavier car than the Cosworth-powered cars. Almost 600 kilograms in this Ferrari, whereas the weight limit is around the 540 kilogram mark. So the Ferrari carrying quite a weight penalty. And this early in the race, the weight penalty will be even greater, of course, because the turbocharged cars are very thirsty and they need to carry more fuel. Down the long straight, Rosberg it is who's very close. Rosberg is in the slipstream. He's out of the slipstream. Rosberg challenging for second place. And Rosberg goes through. Amazingly, Piquet has let Rosberg through, but Piquet is back again. A wonderfully brave move by Rosberg, but so hard was he trying, coming up the inside. He obviously had to leave his braking so late for the right-hander that followed, that the Williams moved across to the left of the road. There was nothing that he could do about it. He left the door open and Piquet nipped back into second place. But that's how hard these men are driving. Now we're going to see it again. Rosberg gets as close as he possibly can, tucked underneath the back, chops out to the right, and in front. But what we don't, alas, see is the manoeuvre that followed that, which was Rosberg going wide and letting Piquet back in front again. That's Jean-Pierre Jarier's Azella that's being lapped there. Piquet then back in second place with the Parmalat Brabham. There's the Brabham pit, nervously, tensely watching this wonderful three-car battle for the lead. And of course the hearts of all the spectators, the 80,000 people here, all with the man in the middle car of that trio, the reigning world champion Nelson Piquet of Brazil. And Piquet having a little look on the inside as they brake hard for the right-hander. Piquet is very, very close indeed. There must have been 6 inches between his front aerofoil there and the back wheel of Gilles Villeneuve's car. And once again Rosberg tries the same manoeuvre on the straight. And this time Rosberg is much neater on the corner that follows. The car is sideways a little bit, but he's sufficiently far in front to keep his door shut on Piquet. Rosberg, the new second man. A magnificent drive for Keke Rosberg, very much less experienced, certainly in running at the front of the field, although let's remember Rosberg from Finland has the unusual achievement of having won his first ever Formula One race. That was a very wet race at Silverstone, an on-championship race some years ago. But he's been rather out in the doldrums in Formula One since, with never a particularly competitive drive, and a lot of commentators felt, a lot of watchers felt, that he was going to be able to go a lot better when he had a competitive car. Here we see that manoeuvre again. This time he gives a little more room to Piquet. He's not quite as close as he was that time. The whole manoeuvre looks a little bit more under control, and this time nothing that Piquet can do about it. Now that won't have pleased the crowd one little bit. Piquet, if anything, dropping back a little bit, and now Rosberg relentlessly setting about the Ferrari in front of him. A little bit of a larger gap now back to third man Piquet. And you can see how hard these men are working, particularly the Ferrari driver Villeneuve, when you see that as they come out of the corners, frequently the wheels are bumping against the curbs, and that's something you don't want to do because it doesn't help your tyre wear, and the tyre wear is always marginal on a hot day like this, particularly with one of the heavier cars like the Ferrari. The Ferrari is actually having to run a harder rubber compound today on its Goodyear tyres, harder rubber for the Ferrari because it's a heavier car. The other car's able to run a slightly softer, stickier rubber, and that indeed means that Villeneuve's task is a heavier one, but lots of power from that Ferrari. Now Rosberg closing once more. Rosberg very, very close, tucked in behind on the long left-hand hairpin. And Piquet's right up there with them again, and you see Patrese in the background in fourth place. Riccardo Patrese is still there in fourth place in the second of the two Brabhams, keeping a watching brief on this battle. And now Rosberg has dropped back a little bit, a tiny mistake perhaps on the last corner. All of these men absolutely on the edge, and one lap, one of them will get a corner perhaps not quite right. Prost still there in fifth place, and John Watson coming onto the leaderboard. John Watson of Northern Ireland in the Marlboro McLaren MP4, the John Barnard designed car. Watson now coming into the picture in sixth place. And Rosberg has another look at the inside, but he was just not anything like close enough to try that. He had a look and immediately decided not to and darted back. The stocky, mustachioed Finnish driver, very, very brave indeed, very determined, and not one little bit lacking in any sort of confidence despite his lack of experience compared to some of the others. Still this three-car battle then, as they start another lap. And Rosberg closing once more. Now Piquet may well be trying to be playing a waiting game here, because he may now feel, as he couldn't get past the Ferrari, he will wait, he'll let Rosberg set about the Ferrari and hope that either both of them make a mistake and take each other off, or indeed that they can wear their tyres out or wear themselves out, because in this heat, driver stamina is going to be a major problem as this race moves into its second third. Patrese, if anything, closing on this battle a little bit as we look on a long telephoto lens down the straight, and this time Rosberg keeps the door shut and makes Piquet go on the outside, and Piquet's done it! Piquet, having been blocked off from the inside line, not one bit upset by that, chopped across to the right of the road and went all the way round the outside of Keke Rosberg. A brilliant move. We're going to see it again now. Rosberg sees him trying it, pulls across to the left of the road, and Piquet says, OK, I'll try the other side. And bouncing across those bumps, brakes hard on, leaving his braking very late. That is a world champion's manoeuvre, and there's Sylvia in the pits, delighted that her man's back into second place. Now Nelson is back at snapping at the heels of the Ferrari once more, and let's remember that through all this excitement, Gilles Villeneuve it is who's led this race from the start. Rosberg hasn't been able to get by, Piquet hasn't been able to get by, and now Piquet's going to have another go. Piquet looking at the inside there, a very twitchy manoeuvre there, the car once again understeering, under braking. You could see the nose of the car twitching, absolutely on the edge. Not, of course, the BMW turbocharged Brabham, because although that's the car that Piquet drove in the Kyle Army race in South Africa, and Piquet's trying on the outside, and Villeneuve has gone off. Villeneuve straight into the barriers. The driver getting out. Piquet made his move and Villeneuve threw it all away. There's Piquet going through on the outside, and watch Villeneuve's left-hand wheels onto the grass. And so nearly did Piquet T-bone into the side of the Ferrari there. Piquet banging on the brakes, almost locking his wheels, rubber smoke pouring off the Brabham's front wheels, and Nelson Piquet the leader now. So that has delighted the Brazilians, and that's very sad for the Ferrari supporters. A rare mistake from Gilles Villeneuve, and that shows how hard Piquet was pushing him. Pushing relentlessly, and an extraordinary mistake from the works Ferrari driver, and having kept the door so convincingly shut, a little mistake, two wheels on the grass, the car swapped ends, and there is Villeneuve, the little French-Canadian, such a brave, such a determined driver. One little mistake, he's in the barriers, the car is damaged, certainly beyond rejoinder, and Gilles is left with that sad, lonely walk back to the pits to tell the Ferrari team manager all about it. So bad news for Ferrari in this race, because Pironi went off earlier, and although Pironi's still in the race, he's very well down. He's now in about 9th place. And that means that we have Cosworth-powered cars dominating the front of the race. The turbos went quickly to start with, but the good old Cosworth DFV, which has been going since the mid-70s, still going. They're the order. Piquet, Rosberg, Patrese, Brabham, Williams, Brabham, then Prost, the first turbo runner, in 4th place. And of course, the retirement there of Villeneuve has promoted John Watson into 5th place. That's Chico Serra there, another Brazilian driver, very much a local hero, although he, driving for the Brazilian Fittipaldi team, is well down the field. He's having his own South American battle there with Eliseo Salazar, the yellow car at the back. The first yellow car is Winkelhock, but the yellow car tucked in behind the blue and white one. There you see it. That is Eliseo Salazar from Chile, and the car in front, Emerson Fittipaldi's team. Emerson Fittipaldi, of course, the greatest of the Brazilian racing drivers, former world champion, now running his own team and using a Brazilian driver, Chico Serra. Serra still managing to hold off in their own private little battle the attentions of the ATS Ford, the yellow German car of Eliseo Salazar. Manfred Winkelhock in the other ATS ahead of them and going extremely strongly in only his second race. He is now up into 7th position. The new 6th place man, Nigel Mansell, in the new Lotus 91. Mansell going very well indeed. That's Winkelhock at the front of the picture there, and that's Patrese going off. Patrese going off all over the place. We just came onto Patrese at the end of a spin, and having rejoined, he is absolutely all over the place, and that's Mansell coming up behind him, so that could be a new 5th place for Mansell. Patrese, with that spin, has fallen all the way down to 5th place, and a very long and involved spin. Patrese obviously in some considerable difficulty there. We're going to see it again. He's already spun. When you start to see this picture, he spins again in his efforts to get the car pointing the right way. He seems to be extremely confused, and finally gets the car more or less pointing the right way and nearly spins it again. And you see the black car coming up behind number 12. That was Nigel Mansell in 6th place. Now that means that John Watson and Alain Prost are now battling, and there you see them, the Renault of Alain Prost, the red and white McLaren of John Watson, and this has now become the battle for 3rd place. Prost not having a particularly happy race with the turbo Renault. His engine has been audibly not quite right, a misfire at the top end, and that seems to have been one reason why Prost, the pole position man, the current World Championship leader, and of course the Kyalami winner, has not been quite so quick. And you see the gap between them on that caption for 3rd place. It's about a 1/4 of a second, it's about a 1/5 of a second between this man, the Renault of Alain Prost, the championship leader, and John Watson, the Irishman who scored that wonderful victory in the British Grand Prix last year, driving for McLaren and now pushing hard on the Renault. This, of course, is the leader. There he is, carrying the number 1, the reigning world champion, Nelson Piquet of Brazil, and he seems to have pulled away a little bit, for the time being anyway, from the attentions of Keke Rosberg. There's Rosberg having a big twitch coming through that left-hander. Rosberg obviously still trying as hard as ever, and it must now be that the heat is starting to take its toll on these drivers. Piquet, Rosberg in the Williams, the second of the two cars, and once again we see this battle going on. And there is Patrese, and goodness me, he is not well. He's slumped down in the cockpit. We saw him spin earlier, you remember, and Patrese obviously not well at all. That's Salazar in the ATS. We were talking about him earlier. Salazar has now got away from Chico Serra at last. Salazar in the ATS, the Chilean driver, and Patrese, as we were just saying, obviously overcome, one must assume, by the heat, because it's 95 degrees Fahrenheit here. It's also 95% humidity. It's very, very sticky and hot indeed. And of course, inside the cockpit of a racing car, it must be a whole way hotter than that. That's Patrese being carried into the back of the pit. Patrese out of the car now. You can just see his crash helmet, and Patrese being taken into the cool shade at the back of the pit. And clearly, when he had that spin that we saw earlier, and he certainly looked in a pretty confused state, and obviously the heat exhaustion must have been starting to tell, and that must have led to him going off the road. Happily, with no injury, happily he was able to drive the car back to the pits. This now is Alain Prost of France. And where's Watson? There is Watson. So Watson has dropped back a little bit just over the last couple of laps, and the heat perhaps telling on him, perhaps a little mistake somewhere. Prost now in third place. Watson, the car we're watching now, the very pretty pointed nose of the beautifully made carbon fibre McLaren MP4. Prost goes out of the picture as Watson comes down the long straight. John Watson then in fourth place, Prost in third place in the Renault. Nelson Piquet still the leader ahead of Keke Rosberg of Finland. And since Patrese's retirement, we now have Nigel Mansell in fifth place, and we have Manfred Winkelhock going very strongly in the ATS in sixth place. So that looks like a championship point, if he can stay there, for Manfred Winkelhock in only his second Grand Prix. This is Prost. Prost in third place, championship leader in the Turbo Renault. The car which for some time now has been the fastest, certainly in a straight line. And you see there that Prost actually is closing a little bit on Rosberg. In fact, there you've seen in that long shot the first four cars. So this is still very much a race. This is the fourth place man, John Watson. That's the third place man, Alain Prost, and that's Watson. The car twitching over the bumps, the big rear aerofoil helping to stick the car down. That's the leader, Nelson Piquet. And they come up to lap. That's Mauro Baldi in the orange car. Mauro Baldi, one of the new names in Formula One this year, who drives for Arrows. And there the Brabham pit. Watch and wait. And Piquet's head seems to be lolling somewhat in the cockpit there. The weight of the crash helmet, as he went round that long left-hander, it seemed that Piquet's head was moving to the outside of the car. And it may be that the fatigue's getting to him. He's still behind Baldi. Baldi now moves across, but chops back in to take the advantage of the tow from the faster car. And that means that Baldi is now splitting the leaders. Piquet in first place and Rosberg in second place. This is Piquet. The narrow nose and the side radiators, typical of modern Formula One design on this Brabham, beautifully finished, beautifully designed by the South African. That's Salazar. Salazar, who'd been driving hard in his own little battle with Chico Serra further down. You can see some damage on the left-hand front tyre there. I don't know if he's clipped something there, but the car all seems to be in one piece. But the ATS team pushing the car back. We were talking about the design of the Brabham. Gordon Murray, the South African designer who's been with Brabham for so long, who designed the BMW turbocharged car, which appeared briefly at Kyalami. That's Chico Serra. So we've seen the departure of Salazar. We now see a rather more dramatic departure for Chico Serra's car, clearly badly damaged there. That was Serra's Fittipaldi, wrecked by the side of the road. And this is the Cosworth-powered Brabham. We were talking about the BMW Turbo, but that has been put to one side for the time being. It's very, very fast. It easily reached 200 miles an hour in a straight line on the straight at Kyalami, but they've decided that there's more development work still needed, and so they're running the Cosworth engine that they've run for some seasons now in a further modified version of last year's car, the Brabham BT49. This is the Brabham BT49D. And Rosberg is still there, not close enough to overtake. There you see the Renault coming into the picture, and there you see the McLaren. So that, once again, is the first four. And although Piquet at the moment is not likely to be challenged by Keke Rosberg, it means that he's got to keep absolutely on the island. There isn't enough time for him to make any mistakes. He's got to follow that groove. There's Rosberg following him round. Over the bumps where the resurfacing's been done. And Rosberg, I think, is a little bit closer. Only 12 cars left in the race now. That's an indication of the heat. It's also an indication of the number of accidents we've had. Happily, none of them with any injury, although obviously Patrese's incident could have been very much worse, and Patrese obviously feeling extremely unwell. Niki Lauda and Carlos Reutemann both out. Lauda and Reutemann collided and both retired shortly afterwards. Elio De Angelis is out. He was hit by Alboreto earlier on. And Winkelhock there you see in 6th place. Piquet, of course, still the leader. Rosberg and Prost still there. And a bigger gap now between Prost and Watson. Over 7 seconds now between Prost and Watson. For a moment, Watson closed on Prost, but now the gap has lengthened a bit, and Prost can relax a little bit, and in fact has even managed to close the gap a little bit himself on the Williams in 2nd place. Here comes Prost now onto the long main straight, over all that rubber left by the smoking tyres at the start. Alain Prost, the championship leader, with a turbo that doesn't sound quite on song. The always rather flat-sounding note of the Renault Turbo, because the turbocharger has the effect of quietening and dulling the sound of the engine. The turbocharger mounted in the line of the exhaust muffles the sound of the engine somewhat, but nevertheless always a very potent machine, and this Renault perhaps not quite on the top of its form, but nevertheless some very useful points in sight for Alain Prost in a very useful 3rd place. And Prost, the pugnacious little Frenchman, who is a lot of people's bet to be at the very top of the World Championship ladder before long. A very determined, very intelligent, very well-organised driver, and a man who very rarely seems to make a mistake. And of course he's in a team that makes very, very quick cars. But for those who expected that the turbocharged cars were going to have matters all their own way this year, this race is a turn-up for the books, because we've got a classic Cosworth battle still for the lead between the two DFV-powered cars of Nelson Piquet, there he is, and Keke Rosberg, there he is. And as you can see on the screen now, as they cross the start-finish line yet again, the gap between them is not very great, and it's certainly possible for Piquet to watch in his mirrors the progress of the pursuit from the stocky, mustachio little Finnish driver Keke Rosberg. There goes the Renault on its way, and we wait now for the McLaren to come into sight as Piquet goes on his way. And perhaps Piquet a little bit tidier through that long downhill left-hander there. The Williams behind was sliding a lot, and perhaps Piquet is now trying to drive a tidy race, trying to preserve his car trying to preserve his tyres and above all trying to preserve his own energy. 63 laps, 2 hours of motor racing, 2.5 seconds. There is the gap between them. 2.5 seconds, and that isn't enough to allow Nelson Piquet to relax one little tiny bit. Piquet, of course, took the championship in that dramatic final round last year. There you see René Arnu's Renault parked by the side of the road. Piquet took the championship in another gruelling race. The gap has gone up now, so Rosberg must have made a mistake somewhere. It's now 3.5 seconds. It was in a similarly gruelling race with a lot of left-hand corners and a lot of heat. 23.5 seconds from leader Piquet back to third man Prost, who's just going out of the picture now. But it was at a similarly exhausting race in Las Vegas that Nelson Piquet was able to take the championship by finishing not at the front, that was Alan Jones. There's his head lolling in the cockpit once more. And as he went round that left-hander, the weight of the crash helmet moved Piquet's head all the way across. You could see it thumping against the side of the cockpit. So all is clearly not well for Piquet. And that's the sort of strain that this relentless race is taking on the leading driver. Now, if Piquet's in trouble there, and if Rosberg, who's a very fit fellow, Rosberg, who keeps extremely fit, does a lot of athletics, it may be that Piquet is suffering more from the heat, as he did in Las Vegas, than some of the other drivers. Again, you see the helmet flopping against the right-hand side, clearly, of the cockpit. And this clearly means that Piquet is under a lot of strain in that car. The temperature inside these cockpits, somebody did once put a thermometer inside the cockpit of a Grand Prix car immediately after a hot race, and amazingly it read 150 degrees Fahrenheit in the cockpit. Bear in mind also that the drivers are wearing all their flame-proof overalls, the two-layer clothing that they wear in case of fire. Bear in mind also the weight of the crash helmet, as you can see, lolling about Piquet's head, moving around as he works his way up through the back markers. And clearly the heat is starting to get to Piquet. Now, it may be that Rosberg certainly is suffering in just the same way. 3.7 seconds the gap now, and the rest of the field sufficiently strung out after 52 of the 63 laps. That caption's about 2 laps old now. It may be that Rosberg is going to be able to put on a spurt in these closing stages, and it may be that Piquet can't do an awful lot about it. That's Watson going up through the picture. Here is Piquet once more, and the car bouncing around over the curbs, the punishment from these cars almost without suspension. Here comes Rosberg now, and you see the Renault behind him. This is Rosberg. And the gap has now gone up to 5.4 seconds. Rosberg then making no impression on Piquet, quite the reverse. Piquet, despite his problems, and look at Rosberg right over the curb there. You just saw a flash of Rosberg getting it very, very wrong indeed, and he comes back into sight at a rather more subdued rate. Rosberg ran wide coming out of that corner you saw in the last shot and went right over the curb. So clearly he too is finding the closing stages of this race an almost impossible strain. Rosberg right over the curbs. Now, it'll remain to be seen whether he's damaged anything. That's Bernie Ecclestone, who is watching the gap between his driver, Bernie Ecclestone of Brabham, watching the gap between his driver Piquet and this man, Rosberg. But obviously, that could well have damaged the underneath of the Williams, damaged the very carefully designed under tray, which is all part of the aerodynamics that helps to stick these cars down onto the road. And Rosberg, therefore, in no condition to close this increasing gap. A marvellous drive by Piquet, and he must now be feeling very, very tired indeed. You can see that the helmet there again, the helmet moving right out to the outside. It must be extraordinarily difficult to drive a car on the limit because his lap times are still very respectable. He's still driving at full racing speed, and he can barely hold his head up in the cockpit. Still this relentless, muggy heat beating down here at Rio de Janeiro. Very, very hot and very exhausting indeed. There's a back marker between Piquet and Rosberg now. That looks like Jarier in the Ozella once more. It is indeed. That's Jean-Pierre Jarier, the French driver, many, many years in Grand Prix racing. He's actually done this is his 108th Grand Prix, so one of the most experienced men on the Grand Prix circuit, but now driving for one of the slower teams. The Ozella cars never as competitive as the front runners. And as Piquet goes on his way, looking extremely tidy, it must be said, despite his obvious fatigue, never appearing to put a wheel wrong. Even after practice on this circuit, several of the drivers found that their legs, their knees, were bruised and bleeding from the battering that they take from just lying in the monocoque cockpit, in the trough, which is the seat. And after a race of this length, a lot of them must be very, very uncomfortable and very tired. Once again, the helmet hanging out to the outside for Piquet. Most of these drivers, of course, keep extremely fit, play a lot of squash, do a lot of circuit training, but nevertheless, motor racing at this level requires fantastic stamina for a long Grand Prix with the pressure that's on and the difficulty of driving these modern cars. Piquet once again. And watch the crash helmet lolling about in the cockpit. And lolling over to the extreme outside once more. The pipe, which you can see in some pictures running from the back of the car into Piquet's helmet, that is the oxygen system, because should the car catch fire, there is a safety system which can be actuated either by the driver or from outside, which not only lets off fire extinguishing material, but also provides oxygen to the driver's helmet. A modern Grand Prix car, a very, very sophisticated piece of equipment. Much use of sophisticated light alloys, and of course in the case of the McLaren and others now, the use of carbon fibre as the material from which the chassis is made. The banked grandstands comparatively quiet now, all willing Nelson Piquet to continue in these closing stages of the race. And Alboreto, as you see there, has moved into 6th place. So Alboreto in the Tyrrell, number 3, despite his shunting match earlier with De Angelis, Alboreto has brought the Tyrrell into 6th place, and that means he has demoted Manfred Winkelhock in the ATS down to 7th. That's the position after 60 laps now of the 63, and this is the penultimate lap for Nelson Piquet. And the gap now getting on for 10 seconds back to... and the crowd no longer silent. The crowd now are starting to feel that the victory for their hero must surely be secure. But Nelson Piquet, no such thoughts. His only concentration is on making not the tiniest mistake. The gap back to Keke Rosberg coming up now to 10 seconds. So Rosberg, having slipped back with his own problems in that monumental moment of which we saw earlier of him nearly going off the road, and Piquet now on his penultimate lap, willing this Brabham to go wrong. The car itself, incidentally, hasn't missed a beat. The hard sound of the Cosworth DFV, the beautiful noise that they make these days with their central exhaust systems, absolutely pure the whole way through. Now he starts his last lap. This is the final lap for Nelson Piquet in the Brazilian Grand Prix here at Rio de Janeiro, and the crowd now willing this man on. He's led ever since he pressured Gilles Villeneuve into an extraordinary mistake. Again, you see the crash helmet leaning on the outside of the cockpit, a very tired, very exhausted driver, but a driver who has made not a single mistake and has driven a very mature race, a race indeed which befits the world champion that he is. And it must be wonderful for Nelson to put on such a tremendous display here at home in front of his own crowd in the Brazilian Grand Prix. This is the final of 63 laps, and the crowd already waving for his victory, the green and yellow Brazilian flag starting to sprout up in the grandstands. Again, that tired head leaning against the outside of the car to relieve it from the G-forces of that long left-hander past the C for the final time. On the brakes yet again, turn it into the left-hander. Neatly clipping the curb there. Still absolutely on the right line for Nelson Piquet. And the checkered flag is ready. The Brabham mechanics all over the road with delight and a spurt of champagne, because already somebody has popped a bottle. There is the delighted Sylvia, his girlfriend, in the pits, and Nelson Piquet has scored perhaps the hardest victory of his racing career. So as the crowd mill around to celebrate a wonderful victory, a wonderful drive also, let's remember, from Keke Rosberg, really showing that he is now part of Frank Williams' team with a vengeance. The third man, Alain Prost, there they are on the winner's rostrum. Piquet in the middle, and a very, very tired Piquet. Piquet is collapsing. Piquet has collapsed, and they're helping him off the rostrum. And Piquet is virtually in a dead faint. That is the heat exhaustion we were talking about. And as the other drivers, as Prost and Keke Rosberg look on, they've got him now sitting on the winner's rostrum. The cheers from the crowd, and that shows just how hard an exhausted Nelson Piquet, his hair plastered down on his head with sweat. Keke Rosberg has his hand on Piquet's shoulder. Rosberg a fine second place. They hand him the champagne. He's almost too tired to shake it over the delighted Brazilian crowd. Prost, of course, third for Renault. John Watson fourth. Nigel Mansell fifth. Michele Alboreto sixth. That's all from Rio, and now we look forward to California in 2 weeks' time, Long Beach, and the United States Grand Prix West.